Spirituality, the way I define it, is connectedness.
Connectedness.
Connectedness to self and outside of self.
Connectedness.
For some people, that includes a divine. For some people, it doesn't.
Connectedness.
I talk a lot, for example, about the 4 existential fears. We're really driven by our fear of meaninglessness, fear of isolation, fear of death, fear of freedom.
Meaninglessness.
Isolation.
Death.
Freedom.
It's like their spiritual house came down with some kind of deconstruction, but the scaffolding, all the ways of thinking Mormon are still there. And so they'll get stuck because they're trying to kind of rebuild their own spiritual home again after it kind of crumbles. But then all the old scaffolding is still there.
Meaninglessness.
Isolation.
Death.
Freedom.
I have a master's degree in theology and the future of American religion. I've written a book on Mormon philosophy. I've just really been playing in this space of religion and theology and what is real and spirituality. And I guess now where I like to play is this space of secular spirituality, which is this approach of how can I get these spiritual tools with as little demands of belief as possible. Like, how do I get the present without the Santa?
Ho, ho, ho.
Maybe we need to play a different game. Maybe the game we need to play is how can I build a meaningful, spiritual, rich, transcendent, beautiful, flourishing life when I don't know ultimate reality?
This is Infants on Thrones,
Baby steps.
You want someone to preach to?
the philosophies of men,
I like magical
You
toys.
want religion, do you?
mingled with humor.
I don't believe in them.
There will be many willing to preach to you the philosophies of men mingled with humor.
We are evolving.
Baby steps.
You can buy anything in this world of money.
Look for the good in everything. Look for the people who will set your soul free. It always seems impossible until it's done. Look for the good in everyone.
All right, welcome back to Infants on Thrones. I'm Glenn Ostland, and this is episode 823, No Nonsense Spirituality with Britt Hartley. And hopefully it's a part 1. Now, some of you may know Britt from Almost Awakened, where she podcasts with Bill Reel. This was my first time talking with Britt, and I really hope that it won't be my last. Today we talk about what it means to be a spiritual atheist, basically. And it was a lot of fun. So, with no further ado.
Hang on to them hats and glasses, cause this here's the wildest ride in the wilderness.
But that doesn't mean that I'm going to change anything else about what I'm doing. It's recording now.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
So Britt, thank you for reaching out to come on Infants on Thrones. I feel like Infants on Thrones is it's drying up. Like whatever water used to be in Infants on Thrones, I don't know how much left I've got in me for the Infants on Thrones stuff, but I'm interested in spirituality. But like Infants on Thrones, and we were talking before we started recording that you kind of missed the Infants on Thrones phase because you had processed your stuff before.
I missed it in its high day. Yeah. By the time you were like really, all over Reddit, it was like, everybody, you've got to listen to this podcast. By the time you were in that place, I had already done a lot of my processing.
Yeah.
So timing wise, we missed each other.
Yeah.
But I'm in the same space as you, is like, I don't know if I wanted to stay there forever, where like you binge hours and hours and hours about Mormon history and polygamy and the whole thing. And eventually I just got into a place where I was really curious about what's next.
Yeah.
What does healthy spirituality look like after this?
And
so I've been hanging out in that place.
I can't wait to hear more about it. I'll tell you, for me, there were a lot of things that kind of shifted for me, but one, I'm a big Jonathan Haidt fan. I love The Righteous Mind. That was really influential on me. And then The Coddling of the American Mind. I don't know if you're familiar with that book or not, but during parts of that book, his co-author, Greg Lukianoff, was talking about cognitive distortions. And I'd never heard that terminology before, that just different ways that we think, these habits of thinking that distort reality in certain ways. And it just like something clicked for me. And I thought, what happened to me being raised Mormon? Like what was the influence of Mormonism on cognitive distortions that I still carry? That it's not really about Mormonism at all. It's about like, am I catastrophizing situations? Am I like a black and white thinker and I don't see nuances?
Yeah.
Am I discounting the positive
100%.
when I'm having conversations? And so I started going more into like clinical mental health and life coaching, and then spirituality became less icky to me because I understood the like mental psychological aspects of spirituality. So I'll shut up now and let you.
Okay. So I work now as a spiritual director. So
Yeah.
it's like this kind of niche part of therapy where we really dig into, your beliefs and deeper things, death and meaning and all these things. And I see what you're talking about, where I meet with largely Mormon-ish clients,
Yeah.
wherever they are on that spectrum, and they'll have gone to therapy, but unless the therapist was Mormon in some way, it's like their spiritual house came down with some kind of deconstruction, but the scaffolding, all the ways of thinking Mormon are still there. And so they'll get stuck because they're trying to kind of rebuild their own spiritual home again after it kind of crumbles. But then all the old scaffolding is still there. And until you can deconstruct, I'm really searching for truth obsessively because of this old pattern, that if I just know the truth, then I'll know how to pattern my life, right? Or whatever the thing is, like it really affects how our brain functions. And so you have to often go deeper than just working with a therapist. You'll have to go into like that scaffolding into your brain in order to really deconstruct that and build something new. Like that's what spiritual reconstruction is all about, is how can we use these tools to build a spiritual space that really feels like home to you.
Yeah.
And how do we do that without, we have to work with all the triggers, we have to work with all the old scaffolding, but that's really the place that I love to play now. And it's so true though, that really getting into those brain patterns is the deeper level of that deconstruction. Like that's not just like learning about the history. That's like, how did this affect my brain? How did this create me?
How do I process information?
Or even just the realization that, I'm not viewing objective reality. Like none of us
no one does.
are participating or interacting with ultimate reality, right? And then you got to take in that heavy piece and then say, okay, how did how I was raised affect my biases and how I view reality? And how can I shift that so that I can create essentially a life worth living?
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to come back and ask you more about that objective reality question in a second. But for listeners of Infants on Thrones who don't know you from Almost Awakened, and what other podcasts do you do?
I just do Almost Awakened with Bill.
Okay.
Bill Real.
But you've got, your website is No Nonsense Spirituality. Mm-hmm. Is that a podcast as well, or that's just your?
That's just, that's just my kind of landing page. If people listen to the podcast, you want to do coaching, I have a course or two on there. Cool. And so that's where people will find me if they want to talk to me directly.
All right. So give a little bit of your background and just, so people know who you are, and then we'll go into like the fun bits of the conversation. Okay. Not that that's not fun, Britt. I'm not saying anything bad about your background.
I'll do this as brief as possible. I don't want to give one of those Mormon stories, 8 hours, of my life. But basically, I was born and raised LDS. I had a bit of a faith crisis at about the age of 16 when the First Strength of Youth pamphlet came out. And I just really in my body, it just came out as rebellion. Like I just couldn't handle this. And no one could answer my questions. Anyway, that rebellion ended up with me being kicked out of my home.
Wow.
And I just really had this idea, like I said, that if I could just figure out what is going on in this universe, like what is happening here, then I'll be able to like order my life the way that I'm supposed to. And so that took me, on a 20, 30 now year journey. I have a master's degree in theology and the future of American religion. I've written a book on Mormon philosophy because that was kind of a part of my journey. I've been a seminary teacher. I've just really been playing in this space of religion and theology and what is real and spirituality. And as I went, I kind of was always deconstructing as I go and had many dark nights of the soul along the way.
Yeah.
And I guess now where I like to play is this space of secular spirituality, which is this approach of how can I get these spiritual tools with as little demands of belief as possible? Like, how do I get the present without the Santa? And I really love this approach. And it's not because I'm the kind of atheist that like, I know for sure there's no God and I'm gonna, come in here like Christopher Hitchens and just like bludgeon people with my intellect. It's more about an intellectual humility that I was also a history teacher. And I'm looking at this and we have so many gods. There's like 10,000 gods that have already died and are no longer being worshipped. And eventually I just kind of accepted, you know what? I think we're bad at this game. This game of like, what is ultimate reality and what is God and what does God want of us and what is God thinking? We're just bad at it. And so I was like, but there's so much like in a religion, there's awe and transcendence and there's rituals and there's community and there's love and there's inspiration. How do I get all that? How do I build that into my life without having to know things that we just really don't know and that we're bad at? And so that's just kind of my approach to spirituality now, which is why my website is No Nonsense Spirituality. It's not that I'm trying to convince you there's no God. It's that I'm trying to help you build that spiritual home with as few, hoops to jump through as possible, because I just think we're bad at that game.
All right. Well, you've said we're bad at that, I think 4 or 5 times. And each time you did, I'm like, so what would it look like to be good at it? What and then with the title of your website, No Nonsense Spirituality, I'm also really curious to know, what is nonsense spirituality? Like, what would you consider nonsense to be in the spiritual realm? And that might go to that question of like, what's good or bad and how we process that. So I've got a list of things that I want to like read to you and ask you, kind of like quiz you these questions, and it might kind of come up in the course of that. But first, I'm really interested to know.
Okay.
Like, what would make it good, and what is
so
nonsense
I'll go
spirituality?
here. I'll go this direction to answer this, because this is kind of on the fly here. So in science, when we're kind of getting a sense of something in science, we have something called like multiple discoveries, which means we're kind of accessing this, whatever it is, law of gravity from multiple directions. We make more sense of it as we go. The thing with religion, though, is that it's not happening with religion. We've been doing religion for at least 100,000 years, maybe 200,000 years. So we've been doing religion for at least tens of thousands of years. But the truths are not converging as far as ultimate truths, as far as this is what's happening in the universe. This is the ultimate story. And I think the reason that is because at the root of a lot of our religious desires is to have something to soften the blow of what it means to be human and be thrown into a world of chaos that we don't understand. And so I talk a lot, for example, about the 4 existential fears. We're really driven by our fear of meaninglessness, fear of isolation, fear of death, fear of freedom. And so all religions, quote unquote, work or are quote unquote right because they all kind of help us soften that blow, right? They all help us with these spiritual tools. They all help us with meaning and community and ritual and all these things. And so it's a different kind of true, right? None of the religions are converging really on anything, even Christianity itself. There's only 2 things in the whole history of Christianity that all Christians believed. And it's that Jesus was coming in their lifetime and that they were wrong. That's it. Like, it changes so much, right? And so I just had this point of intellectual humility of like, I'm not sure that we're really getting anywhere with these questions that we're asking about ultimate reality and religion. And I think this subjective kind of feeling game that we play, where because I feel this, therefore I know for sure that this is heaven and this is hell and this is the story and this is the God. When you see that story just be so different across time, you begin to think, you know what, maybe we need to play a different game. Maybe the game we need to play is, how do I build a meaningful life when I don't know ultimate reality, when I don't know what consciousness is, because that's the big mystery right now in science and religion. What is consciousness? How did it come from matter? So how can I build a meaningful, spiritual, rich, transcendent, beautiful, flourishing life and not know these things? Because when you look at our history and our attempts at this question, we're just really all over the place. And it seems to be that we're doing this because we're just trying to soften, again, the blow of just what it means to be human. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot in there. Wow. Yeah, give me a minute to process that, Brett. One of the questions that I had, I think you answered it though, as you were talking, because you were saying that religion really hasn't worked. And I'm thinking, well, what would it look like if it did work? And I think your answer to that question is that we would have meaningful lives without a sense of certainty. Like we would be okay with not knowing. So the existential questions that you talked about, those 4 different areas, they wouldn't create angst. They'd be accepted, and we'd be like, yeah, we don't know any of those things, and it's okay and it's cool. And so there's kind of like this inner peace that comes from not knowing, instead of this desperate attempt at like, oh, this is the new best real thing. Oh wait, no, this is the new best real thing. Kind of like letting go of that and just living. I'm thinking. What do you think about that, Britt?
I mean, even in Christianity, every couple of decades, there's a new kind of Christian God, right? It changes in some way, even within within one Christian tradition. And so, yeah, it's really kind of letting go of that and saying, how can we get the benefits? Because you look at something like rituals, and rituals scientifically help us to process things. So if you just take a group of people, they've done studies on this, you take a group of people and you say, someone's going to win $200, and they give someone $200 and they leave the room. The rest of the group, there's a control group, and they just have to kind of write out their feelings of how disappointed that they were, what they would have done with the money, and they kind of rate how they're feeling. And then in the experimental group, they make up a ritual. Write out your feelings, put some salt on it, turn around 3 times and throw it in a fire. They essentially make up a ritual for them. But after they do the ritual, they report, I'm over it. It's going to be fine. I'm not really upset that I didn't win the money. And so there's all kinds of these little tricks, placebos or tools, there's different words here, but there's all kinds of like that are embedded in religion. And so essentially what we're trying to do right now in society, especially with the kind of threat of fundamentalism, is how do we separate the baby from the bathwater? How do we get rituals and rites of passage? And it's so beautiful in the Jewish community. When someone dies, there's these intense rituals for like the first week. The person who's grieving doesn't have to talk. And then in the weeks after, they have to go to work, but only half the time. And then in the months after, they're kind of invited to come back into the full society. And it's structured into the community. We're going to help you and hold you through this death thing because we know that it's really hard. Those are extraordinarily helpful. And so religions, because they're so powerful and they've lasted so long because they just have thousands of tools like that embedded into the system. But the stories and the truths and the hoops that you go through about ultimate reality are just becoming harder and harder to believe as we become so global and as we begin to learn so much about science and history and all these things. And so the goal right now and kind of this zeitgeist that I'm interested in is, how do we separate this baby from the bathwater so that people who are leaving religion, this growing group of nuns, they have a danger on the other side, which is that you've removed yourself and your children from a lot of tools that may be helpful to replace.
Yeah. How would I know a religion if I came across one? Like if I had grown up on a desert island in the middle of nowhere, never been around people at all, and I come into society, how would I know if I was getting involved in a religion?
Yeah, that's a good one, because there's some societies where it's so embedded in the culture that you really don't even know that it's a religion until you kind of go outside of it. But
I've worked for a corporation before that I would argue is religious.
Or cults, you
You
can
know.
do the same thing with cults. There's the LuLaRoe cult, and like there's the cult of CrossFit and keto and whatever, and there's all kinds of cults that, this is not just religious. Essentially, for religion, the definition I like to use is religion is kind of the tool that you're using for how you're orienting yourself in the universe. And so it's just this, and so I don't think there's necessarily anything inherently wrong with religion. And I think there's some religions that are healthier than others. And it's just, we're thrown into chaos. We don't really fully know what's going on. And so however you're orienting yourself, some people will call that religion. I've seen that definition used in kind of spiritual spaces. And then for cults, you kind of look at the bite model. How is this group controlling my behavior and the information? And you just kind of look at the level of control happening. But the truth that people don't like to say is that cults and religions feel good, right? It's that sense of order in chaos. It feels really good to be in a cult. You're right. You know everything about everything. You know what's going to happen next. It feels really secure and safe. And so what I'm trying to do is, for this growing group of nuns, they're really craving that order and security and sense of morality and sense of, religions, especially something like Judaism that's old. They have these calendars that just kind of give you a rhythm and heartbeat to your life. And when you don't have that, it can feel like chaos. For people who are leaving churches, it's like the first breath is really freeing, but the last breath is like, I'm terrified. What do I do now? Like there's endless possibilities. That's paralyzing. And so, I don't know if that answers your question, but it's something that we crave, right? It's something that we crave because we want to be balanced between order and chaos. And religion really gives us a lot of that order piece.
Yeah, I'll tell you, the word religion I find really problematic, and kind of for like you stated earlier that there's a problem when people leave religion, that they're also leaving behind the tools that religion provides. And I think that when people leave religion, they think that they're leaving religion, but they're not. Because religion is everywhere. Religion is more like an internal kind of thing of, am I going to allow myself to just follow blindly what somebody else says, instead of having like critical thinking skills? Am I, it.
Yeah. So in the way that you're defining it there, you're kind of defining religion as this kind of organized structure. And so you think that you're leaving religion, and you and I probably know people like this, like they'll leave Mormonism and they'll go headfirst into fundamentalist Christianity, or they're an atheist, but like Sam Harris is just essentially the new prophet, right?
Exactly.
You haven't left religion, you've just changed religions,
and secular humanism becomes your new religion,
or the politics of the left. I've seen that move where like all of a sudden, just Bill Maher is just your new prophet. And so when we were talking before about the structures of the brain, that's why it's so important that when you're deconstructing, you don't just stop at deconstructing the history of whatever religion you come from. You've got to deconstruct deeper than that, or your brain is essentially primed for the next cult, for the next religion, for the next prophet to tell you, oh, you don't know what to do with your life? Go this way. Here's my 12-step path, or whatever the thing is.
Yeah.
And so you have to deconstruct deeper than that to say, oh, I'm clinging on to the words of this person because I'm feeling fear. And if I can just sit with my fear and name and face my fear, then I won't be so clingy the next time I hear, some Sam Harris person and it's like, oh, okay, he has all the answers, so I'll just be one of those minions. And so it's that deeper deconstruction that gives you the freedom to say, I know my fears, I've faced them, and I'm not, you're essentially kind of undoing the cult and the religious framework that still exists in your brain even after you leave an organized religion.
Yeah. So how do you do that and still hold on to like community rituals that have the kind of power that you were talking about before?
Yeah, so this is the question that nobody's really answered yet. So I know a lot of people, and Bill and I talk to a lot of people in the secular spirituality space, and this is the problem that nobody has figured out yet. And it may be too early. And here's why: most of the people, or a lot of the people leaving religion, are very triggered, right? There's religious trauma, there's pain, there's betrayal, there's all the things.
Yeah.
And so to get that group of people to buy into, hey, I'm going to show up at the local YMCA and I'm going to pay money for meditation classes or whatever, that group may be too triggered and traumatized to make that move. It may not happen until the next generation. Maybe all our generation could do is just kind of process some of this stuff and then leave the next question to the next generation to figure out. So it may be that it's too early, but I talk to a lot of people about how do we do this. And it's essentially, you almost have to wait until it's not working for you, or you're missing something, or you're homesick for something. And then you're essentially having to build that up yourself. And that is not easy. And so people who leave religion and just think that they have, like, they're so much smarter than everyone else. It took 2,000 years for Christianity to become what it is. The idea that you could just, oh, I'm just going to like create a community and create rituals for my children and have a book that we all read together and all my friends read together. The idea that you're going to do that from scratch in a couple years is just a little bit naive. There's a lot there, not to scare anyone. But I do think it's deeper than just, oh, I left the religion, so I'm good now. Like, no, there's still some work to do. There's still some things to do in order to move into a place where you feel like you've replaced the tools that you've left behind, which is a really beautiful journey. It's a journey into your own authenticity.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, nobody's figured out that question yet. We're all just kind of playing. I've seen secular churches that come up and say like, we're going to do church, but it's going to be different and we're not going to require any belief. The problem is you get the problems of the other side, which is that there's nothing drawing these people together.
Yeah.
And so it's a problem. It's things are either too ordered and too rigid, or they're so like, we're going to be the opposite of religion. And it's like, okay, but that's its own set of problems. You have a group of people that's not really bonded together. Mm-hmm. You have a group of people that aren't going to contribute financially, which means the people who are leading it are going to have to do it from their own pocket when religions just have billions of dollars, right? So
some question more than others.
Yeah, some more than others. So the question of how to balance that, nobody's fully figured out yet. Lots of people are trying. People are trying to do that individually. And I think it's something that we'll figure out, but it's like this pendulum swing. Like we went from really, really structured and religious, and there's this kind of swing to like rejection of that. And it may take time for us to balance out and realize, hey, actually gathering with people on a certain day, that's not inherently bad. Maybe we can do this. But we just may be too triggered to try that right now, just kind of especially as a post-Mormon community.
Yeah. All right. Well, now I'm so curious to see how you would respond to these questions.
Okay, shoot.
These are questions. I've used these for surveys that I've done just for listeners of Infants on Thrones. I also use these when I have my own life coaching clients come in. I ask them these questions because I want to get a sense of where they're at in these kinds of issues. So if you can remember the answers, it's basically like a 5-point scale where the extremes are on either end and the middle one is neutral. So you either strongly agree, mostly agree, you're ambivalent, unsure, really don't have any opinion, or you slightly disagree, or you strongly disagree.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So meditation is a healthy practice. What would you say?
Yeah, I'm gonna go strongly agree for that one.
Tell me why.
There's something that just can't replace the freedom that comes from recognizing that you are not your thoughts.
Mm.
There's just really no replacement for that I've found really anywhere else. You can do psychedelics to kind of glimpse into that, but it's not going to really change your life until you kind of do it in your daily life. But just that idea that this kind of ticker tape of nonsense that my brain is just streaming all the time, most of it with a negative bias, most of it just unhelpful, blah, blah, blah nonsense. There's just such beautiful space that comes from finding a space where you can watch your thoughts and you can make, I really think that's the gateway to be able to make true choices.
Yeah.
Is like, I'm recognizing that I'm having some angry thoughts or some jealous thoughts. Okay, what message does that have to say to me? Oh, it's telling me that I'm jealous because it's bringing something up from a past relationship. Oh, I'm going to choose this course of action. That move, it just takes a second or two, but that move of, instead of being the thought, which I'm going to react, and watching the thought and making a choice, is really the most freedom that us humans have.
Yeah. And I mean, we could spend a long time talking just about this one.
Yeah.
I had this conversation with a client of mine the other day where we were talking about, because when we first started coaching, she knew, she'd heard people describe it this way: you're not your thoughts, but didn't really know what the experience of that was like. Because it's like, if you choose anger, for example, or jealousy, you mentioned a couple of different emotions that could come up. If you are feeling that so strongly, it's like you're looking through the eyes of the anger, or you're looking through the eyes of the jealousy, and you just feel it everywhere in your body. Whereas observing it, you like step out, and it's almost like you're watching yourself get angry, but you're not seeing it through your eyes. You're seeing it through like this detached observer eye. And maybe that space between where you are as an observer and where you would be if you were like seeing it first person, maybe like a first person to third person kind of experience, there still might be some feelings that you feel. So you're not totally out of the feeling, because it's still happening in your body.
You don't turn into a robot. You just get a little bit more freedom. It's like getting off the roller coaster of the emotions that just come up on you. None of us, if we're having a conversation and you say, I don't know, F you, I hate you, or something. Yeah. And like, my emotions are just going to do what they're going to do. And so it's really a roller coaster that you are on all the time. And it's this step of getting off and saying, I can get off this roller coaster at any time. Yeah. And that's just a lot of freedom. So I'm going to say strongly agree for sure.
And how do you have that conversation with somebody who really doesn't have the experience of being able to observe their thoughts objectively? They've only experienced what it's like to be in it first person. So like, they might nod and go, okay, yeah, I know what you're saying, but they've never actually had that experience of it. That's the tricky. Like, I would love to help people go, here, let me take you away from the experience so you can turn around and look at it and see it. And then how do we grow this this objective space so you can become more of a neutral observer of your thoughts. And as you become more neutral, you become more powerful, empowered on being able to make those choices.
Being able to step off the roller coaster of emotion is really the only superpower that's like available to us as humans. But it is, I think, a superpower. You just have a lot more choice. As far as how to tap into that, especially for someone who just hasn't sat with their thoughts, because it's hard to sit on a mat when your brain's going crazy.
You're bored.
Sometimes I can get through it with a body thing. So I'll ask someone, how would you explain how you're feeling? So if I'm working with someone, it would be, draw up a memory of something that you were really angry, really jealous, whatever the emotion is. And then how would you explain what you're feeling to an alien that doesn't have a body? Well, it's like, I feel pressure on my chest. I feel there's some perspiration on my palms, or whatever it is. And it's really, you can almost do that with the body too. of instead of I am my body and I am this feeling, and then your brain starts telling the story of why they suck or whatever it is. If when you start to actually ask them, what does it feel like? It almost invites them to take that step back and like, oh, okay, what is happening in my body? What is my brain doing right now? So trying to have someone explain it to someone as if they were an alien is kind of a little trick I'll use to kind of invite someone to take that step back and observe what's going on within themselves.
I don't really want to derail this conversation right now,
Do
but
it.
I will let you know that since April, I have been doing this, imagining myself as an unembodied alien through this channeling podcast that I've been working on that has like I've noticed as like, and I know I'm doing a performance. I make it very clear what I'm doing is a performance, but I'm creating this character that observes things, and the more I do it, that more of that psychological distance, that neutrality, I feel like I've created in myself. So that's really interesting that's what you suggest that people do. That wouldn't fit under the no nonsense part of spirituality, though, Britt. That might delve into some nonsense issues for you.
Yeah, no, I am all for visualization. I'll do guided meditations where you're a tree, or I love Jungian archetypes or dream work.
Yeah.
Like I think there's a space for all of those things. It's just that separation of, hey, we're going to do a guided meditation where you're going to imagine yourself as a tree, and maybe there'll be some subconscious symbols that may be insightful to you. But at the end of the day, you're not a tree, and I'm not going to force you to believe that you are a tree. So that's the separation. I'm okay, like stories, visuals. I'm a great reader and lover of text, and so I play in all these spaces. It's just I don't want you to have to require me to believe something in order for me to get the benefits of this practice.
Yeah, I love that. All right, the next question I've got for you, Britt.
Okay.
Spirituality is a healthy way of looking at the world.
Spirituality is a healthy way of looking at the world. Yeah, I don't think I've ever phrased it that way. So I'll say it like this. So I'm going to say agree. And because spirituality, the way I define it is connectedness. So connectedness to self and outside of self. For some people, that includes a divine. For some people, it doesn't.
Yeah.
For some people, it's just, we are so interconnected that the higher power is essentially the connection of all of us. It's the idea. I really like the idea of like a bee in a hive. Like the bee is very small. It lives 45 days. It's almost meaningless by itself, but the hive lasts for decades. It spreads across miles and miles. It affects the ecosystem. Honey lasts forever. We're still finding honey in Egyptian tombs. I love this idea of there's nothing spooky or divine about a hive, but in comparison to a bee, it's kind of a higher power. So I kind of like that. So yeah, I do think it's healthy I'm going to approach life with trying to get deeper and deeper to connection to myself and to others, because that's really the antidote to meaninglessness and depression and all these things is really being deeply connected to your authentic self, and then deeply connected to the world around you. I mean, that's the antidote to nihilism.
I love the way you answered that question, and especially talking about the that nihilistic depression that can really come when you don't have meaning in the world, and you start thinking there's no meaning and it's all bullshit, and like that can be a really dark, depressing path to go down. And the reason why I asked this question and all of these questions it's not that I think that there's like a right or a wrong answer to any of them. It's I want to know how you see things. I want to like, where are you at? And because what I'm looking for is that, like, are you somebody right now that is able to create meaning in your life, or are you suspicious of being able to create meaning in your life? Do you have these limiting beliefs that's preventing you because of these wounds that you talked about before, that being triggered, that you just can't do it because if like the word spirituality will mean something different to different people. If you hear the word spirituality and you think back to some really abusive experience in religion that you've had, you're not going to think that it's a healthy way of looking at the world. And so kind of let's get to it and unpack it here. But I really like that answer that you
it's
gave,
been
Britt.
it's been enough time for me that I can kind of give the answer that
For
I
sure.
gave, but I definitely relate to, there's dark nights of the soul that I've been in that have been very nihilistic, when you're taking in a lot of truths that you just weren't really expecting of the universe, right?
Yeah.
And those can be really, really dark places. And then you get kind of this allergy to truth, allergy to spirituality. You just kind of have this reaction to it. And so this is why I really try to be as safe as possible as a spiritual director, and
Yeah.
people will come to me simply because they know I'm never going to do any Jesus smuggling or God
Right.
smuggling, which
Jesus
is
smuggling or God
that
smuggling. Yeah.
Jesus smuggling is the phrase that atheists use for like, we're
Yeah.
talking and you're going to do it somewhere. It's like in debates with believers, you're going to smuggle in Jesus in here somewhere.
Yeah.
And they're always kind of like on edge for that. But if they know that I'm never going to do that to them, I have people who will reach out to me and do coaching with me specifically because there's just like a tiny, tiny bit of trust to move forward with someone, whereas everyone else is just, you're just too suspicious to me. And I understand that it's very painful when you when you have an existential crisis.
Yeah. Well, creating that safe space, that's the single most important and most effective thing in any kind of like a coaching or therapeutic relationship. And I think that might be, you mentioned earlier when you were talking about ex-Mormons that go, or Mormons that are going through a faith crisis that go to a non-Mormon therapist that just doesn't understand where they're coming from with it. I personally think at this point that one of the reasons why it's difficult to gain that sense of safety and create that empathy is because the Mormon thinks because this person isn't Mormon, they can't understand me because they don't recognize my symbols. So they don't know what is going on. Where what I think now is that a really good therapist will recognize that these symbols, it doesn't matter what the symbol is, what's on the other side of the symbol, what's it's representing. But it's like I had this experience years ago. I was writing I studied folklore, and I was writing a dissertation on Mormon humor, and I interviewed a comedian that went to he toured all around the country, but when he would come to Provo, I would ask him, what would you do differently in Provo? He's like, that's an interesting question because I'll change a few things about my bit, but not much. But when I talk to Mormons afterwards, they seem to think that like their issues are unique and specific to them. But I go into the South, they're still, like not dating at 16, or like all these it's not that weird, not that different.
Yeah, there is this thing that somehow Mormons, and this is our old thinking of just like we're so special and peculiar and we're God's favorite. Right. But it's almost like even afterwards, it's like we have the monopoly of existential crisis. And it's like there's a reason that it's called midlife crisis. It's because like a lot of people go through this. Like a lot of people, like, I don't know what my identity, or I don't know what my beliefs are, or I'm raising kids and I don't know how to ask their questions about God. Like somehow Mormons think that like we're the only, like we're the only ones there. And it's like, no, there's a reason that it's called midlife crisis. There's a reason that Dante's Divine Comedy 1,000 years ago says, midway on life's journey, I found myself lost. Like it's not too uncommon of a human situation to be facing nihilism, to be facing, that swing between order and chaos. We may have our own like unique language, or therapists can do more to kind of understand why we may be hung up in certain places. But yeah, we're all humans here. We're not that peculiar.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Okay. Next question. Religion has an overall positive influence on the world.
I'm going to say disagree on this one.
Is that a slightly or strongly disagree?
I'm going to say slightly.
Okay.
I lean towards disagreeing, but I'm not so far that, I listen to Christopher Hitchens a lot. He's just a really beautiful orator. I just really love hearing him speak. And, he'll say that, religion's poison everything. It does, it does nothing good. And I'm not quite there, but I definitely lean towards that this is something that we need to outgrow. This is something that does more harm than good in getting to where we want to go. And especially with the threat of fundamentalism, one of the most sad things to me is the idea that we could blow up this planet, that it's the only one that we know of that has life on it, and that we would blow it up fighting over who's God and whose heaven is right. The idea, the absurdity of that, like, literally makes me sick that we would do that. And I do have a fear of fundamentalism when it comes to existential risk. And I just think it's something I do. And people may be surprised because, again, like, I have a master's degree in theology. I'll quote scripture. I love doing psychological deep dives with different scripture stories. I'll do all of that. But I'm doing that because there's tools and there's wisdom there that is useful that I'm drawing out. But religion itself is something that I just think we need to outgrow. It's time to outgrow this.
Yeah. I used to feel more like that than I do now. And boy, and I don't think I even have time to unpack all of the reasons why I shifted, but the main influence on me was Yuval Harari and Sapiens. And kind of going back to the example that you gave earlier about the bees in the hive, and how there are some forms of life on this planet that are just really well connected to socialize with each other, and they're looking for each other's mutual benefit in the things that they do. And humans aren't like that. But when we have shared fictions and shared stories and shared meaning, then we group together. And like, if I look back at the history, and so what Sapiens made me do was kind of made me rethink the value that religion as a system of fictions has created in bringing people together. And yeah, there's definitely the part where you get a group of people together and they're like, we're right. And then another group's like, no, we're right. And then they go to war over stupid shit like that. I think that's a problem. But the way of having like shared fictions, first of all, like you said before about objective reality, every single person has a fictional view of objective reality.
So if you were to say that same question but use the word myths instead of religion, that's where I would go. Like, myths, like, if we want to not do George Washington, the historical person, we're just going to tell kids about the cherry tree and be honest or whatever, or the myth of money, the myth of America. I mean, the reason that we're able to create societies as humans is, we're able to imagine together. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong about that. I think that that's really beautiful. It really separates us from the animal kingdom. We're able to build beautiful things together. I love all of that. I'm willing to take the risk at this point in my, and I may shift on this spectrum if we were to talk 10 years later, but I'm willing to take the risk that I think we can do this without religion or without God, because, and we don't have proof yet that we can. It may be that we really can't do this unless we have a shared God myth and a shared story and how religions have always done it. It's possible that will come up to that hang up, but I'm willing to take that risk based on where we've been and where I think we could go.
Has there ever really been, and I don't know the answer to this question, so this is a truly open question. Has there been a society that doesn't have religion that is really successful? And I know people point to Norway, but I don't know if that's really the case or not.
The one, so when someone asked Christopher Hitchens this in a debate, or someone like him, I like to watch a lot of debates between atheists and believers, because you get to play out these arguments, right? I find debates really helpful. And they asked him this, and he said something to the effect of, well, if we believe that America has the most individual rights, it may not be the highest on the happiness scale or healthcare, all these things, but let's just say individual rights. The reason that it got there is because Thomas Jefferson was a deist. Like, maybe there's a creator, but certainly not a God that cares about this world. And he was insightful enough to say, whatever government we're going to build, we need to not have God involved in order for this to work. He knew enough about history to go there. And so, Thomas Paine, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, they're all kind of these deists where they didn't quite have enough science to say that they were atheist, but they truly believed we've got to be able to build this government without God in it. And so there's only one, the Constitution doesn't mention God. There's only one mention of God. I think it's in the Declaration of Independence and it's just that it's a creator, right? It's not a God that's intimately connected. Now, of course, in America now, we're such a religious country and the Christian right is such a powerful political force. But if we want to look at how America became what it is as far as individual rights and secular society and all these things, it was because we took God out of the building of the government.
Well, we had to if we were rebelling against the King of England and his divine sanction.
It's more than that, though. We were starting to fight amongst ourselves in states. So like Methodist, Presbyterians, they were all fighting. Obviously, they all wanted to be the state religion. And eventually, like, we can thank Thomas Jefferson for at least trying to put up a wall and say, we're going to keep that out of this kind of society and government that we're trying to build. And there's such wisdom in that. And so it makes me sometimes laugh, sometimes get angry at the Christian right who will talk about, this nation was built by these founders who believed in God and we need to be a Christian nation. It's like they were trying to get away from that. Like they were trying to stop that from destroying the country. They were trying to build something that would last longer than the fights between Christian sects.
Yeah.
So
and all of that stuff,
that's somewhat of an argument. Like America became successful because it tried to not become a theocracy.
Yeah. And I think all of that stuff, the biggest question to me is your heart like open towards other people, or is it shut towards other people? Like, do you care about everyone or other people, or you only care about yourselves or the ones that fit this way? And like, to me, that's where we need to put more focus and attention, and it needs to happen at an early stage, like an early childhood development, where I don't know, like I think our whole system is just so messed up the way that it is to like point to just religion or something like that and say that's the problem.
Yeah.
The reason I push back on it, I think so often as I do, is I think it's just a simplistic way of like, okay, we're creating religion as the boogeyman, and then we go, let's hunt down the boogeyman and take out the boogeyman. And I just don't think that's really
the other good argument, if I were arguing against myself, is that, like you say, if we don't, the reason that I say outgrow religion and not get rid of it is that if we don't outgrow it, what happens in that vacuum when religion leaves is politics. So politics becomes the new religion. And even in something, I wouldn't necessarily say that, the USSR was a secular state or an atheist state even. It's really what Nietzsche predicted when he said, I think God is dead. And I think this is all just going to turn into like whoever the czar is going to be God. And it's going to be worse than what religion did. Because at least with religion, you have Jesus you've got some good Jesus stuff to hold it together. When you just have Lenin and Stalin, like that tends to be worse. And so that's a good argument that, hey, if we don't outgrow this thing, if we don't recognize kind of what's happening in our own brains and our own history and all of that, then politics becoming religion may be worse. And that's a good argument, which is why I just really think the answer is we have to outgrow this. We have to recognize we do this with other things. Like we recognize that if we were both to have a Snickers candy bar right now, some Halloween candy, our bodies, our ancient kind of Paleolithic bodies will go, sugar, I need more of this. I need more, get more. And we all kind of know as a society, hey, our bodies do this because, there used to be scarcity. And now when your body is saying, I need more Snickers bars, it's like, we don't need to do this. Like, we can outgrow this impulse that's old. And essentially, I want to do the same thing with religion. Like, hey, I understand the impulse to turn to a prophet to answer all your problems. I understand the impulse to whatever the thing is that is helpful in religion. let's kind of outgrow some of these impulses and realize these are things built in our brains and our bodies from older ways of being, and we don't have to, and meditation's part of that, right? We don't have to choose that. That may not be the best way.
Yeah. Developing that metacognitive ability to observe what's coming up and make choices on it is what you're talking, instead of being like a slave to your own biology and neurology. Okay. All right. The next question I have for you. There is some kind of God or supreme intelligence in the universe.
Yeah, I'm going to say slightly disagree.
All right.
And that's just where I'm at right now.
Yeah.
I've probably studied the God question for about 20 years. So much so that I kept going deeper. I'm all but dissertation in my theology degree. I left it there because
Me too, with my folklore degree.
Yeah, I don't quite have the energy to push it over yet. Maybe I will someday. Because if there was a God, and if there was something we could know about God, it seems to me it's kind of this question of what is reality, what is ultimate reality, that seemed to me to be the best question. Like, what other question, to me personally, my interest, what question could be more interesting and more important to study than that? So I say that just that's where I am. It just seems to me to be a better explanation that this is a projection based on our human psychological needs.
Yeah.
Although I do talk to other people who have very complex and very even scientific ways to work in the God thing. I don't find it convincing enough, and I don't find it necessary. And my personal belief is that when I take someone through their 4 existential fears, right? We're going to face your mortality. We're going to face meaninglessness. We're going to face that feeling of isolation. We're going to face that fear of freedom, that you are actually responsible for your life and you can't just like pick up a tarot card and that's going to explain everything. Like, when we face those fears and we essentially grow to meet them, I see people let go of God. I don't, and not that they become an atheist and I'm sure there's no God, but they at least don't need to know anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a big part of it. I think God is a lot of our projections, but again, I've shifted many times on that path, and that's just where I am right now. I'm resistant to the idea.
Yeah, and I agree with you 100% that whatever somebody thinks is God or a supreme intelligence in the universe is 100% their projection of it and a fiction. The thing I'm curious about, you mentioned earlier that there are groups of people, or you were talking about the founding fathers, that they didn't have enough science to know or to be aware that there's not really a God. Really? I very much like to see the science that proves that the's not a God.
Right. So what I mean by that is Thomas Jefferson, he was hiking somewhere and he was in a place where there wasn't any ocean around. And he was looking at kind of the rock sediment layers, as one does apparently. And there was a couple layers where there were shells, like ocean kind of seashells. And he wrote in his journal that I don't understand how this is here enough to rule out that this is not that this is not a creator. This is really before evolution, right? So he's a deist. He's definitely anti-theist before Darwin, which took a little work. Like, we can give him credit for that. But there was enough little things like that he couldn't explain, that he just couldn't fully go to a deist, essentially. And so, yeah, he couldn't fully go there. But I think if he had, Richard Dawkins now, or all these other characters, I think if he were alive today, he would be an atheist, pretty strong one, because he was pushing what atheist was, which is before Darwin, pretty far for that time.
Yeah, and when I'm discussing these questions with you or with anybody else, I don't think there's like a right or a wrong answer. It's
Oh yeah.
always
No,
interesting
this
to
is so
see
fun.
like
Yeah, this is so
where
fun.
somebody leans, and especially this question of God or supreme intelligence. If you're leaning one direction or the other, why? Like, what does that say about you? And so what you're telling me, I'm just like, I'm resistant to it. I've seen too much abuse happen around this idea, too much angst, and it seems like it's the certainty that people carry, when that certainty isn't really able to be supported with evidence, that is kind of an issue. Am I right about
Yeah,
that with you?
yeah, yeah. The certainty obviously bothers me, but that's a whole kind of separate human psychological thing. What I see
Yeah,
with gods is how most people view um like the Greek gods and Mount
mm,
Olympus, right? You can study that in eighth grade, and it's super fun and interesting because what the Greeks did is they kind of split up the entire human psyche and gave each part of the human psyche a god, like a
sure.
name.
Yeah,
And that's super interesting. Can you learn a lot from that, from Chiron and all these stories? There's some really deep psychological stuff going on that you can study, all that archetypal stuff. Is that interesting? Is it a helpful tool? Yeah. But we all kind of recognize, oh, they did this, like they did this, like this is obviously human projection.
yeah.
And then we outgrew it, right? And everyone is kind of there about most gods. Like the majority of the gods, there's about 400 that are, or sorry, 4,000 that are on offer right now. And for most of them, people feel the way towards that god the way that people feel about Greek gods. And I'm just kind of there with all of them. Like one more, like you believe that about 399,000 gods or whatever, 3,999 gods. I'm kind of in that place for all of them.
Yeah. Okay, just one more question on the God thing, and then we'll
Okay.
move to the next one. You talked about evolution. Do you think that evolution happens only on this planet, or do you think that it happens is like a universal constant?
Yeah, I'm okay with just I don't know on this one. I'm okay with
You don't have
just
an
yeah.
opinion one way or the other?
I would say I'm not yeah, I don't know enough to have an educated opinion, and so when I'm in that place, I'm okay with really just saying I don't know, and that's mysterious. I love listening to Neil Tyson deGrasse. His is probably my favorite like science
Yeah.
podcast. And they'll ask him stuff all the time about aliens and all this stuff, and he just says that's mysterious. I don't know. And I just
Yeah.
love how he just like he knows far more about science than I do. And he'll talk about, I've heard all the theories about why there's not life in the universe or why we haven't found life in the universe. And those are all interesting. I'll listen to that all day. I'll listen to him talk about that all day.
Hmm.
But I just really leave that in I don't know land. And
Do,
I'm
do,
okay
you,
with that.
do you think you're truly neutral on that question? Like you really
No.
don't know, or are you leaning one way or the other on what you think is likely and probable?
Yeah. Um, I would say, yeah, that's such a good question. Yeah, I would say that I really put that in I don't know truly. Now that doesn't mean I'm neutral because I'm going to have a lot of biases and the particular science podcasts that I listen to, which tend to be this, So I wouldn't say that it's an unbiased, neutral, none of us are completely neutral really about anything.
Yeah.
But I would say that I truly put that in I don't know. And I'm
Okay.
okay. Yeah, I'm really okay.
Cool.
I love talking about it. I love the mystery about it. I love like there's this theory that I heard the other day that was like the reason that we don't have life is because or that we don't see life in the universe is because evolution, in order for evolution to really take off, it really has to be this idea of like life at all costs, right? It's really violent. It's really in order to really get going. And so maybe, the kind of life that's really going to make it in the universe has to be that strong, has to be that violent, has to take over. We have to have Rome and all these things like this. And so then what happens is that all these societies will eventually self-implode and eat themselves up and blow themselves up in some way. And so his theory was that there is life in the universe, but it's like these little glimpses of light across the universe that start and then blow up. And I'll listen to those all day. And I'm just, yeah, I'm really okay with just saying, wow, I don't know, but that was really interesting. And science is, I like to listen to it. I get into it more, but I've just always been kind of a history English. That's kind of always been my leaning to. So I try not to get into scientific depths that I'm just really not qualified to.
I'm really excited for the sapiens version of history that starts from us as being single-celled organisms all the way up through all of our evolutionary states up to humans. Not just that starts once we're humans or whatever, Homo sapien or something like that, because the DNA that we're carrying around goes all the way back to the first forms of life on this planet. And the times that we're talking about, like when you're saying we need something like Rome or whatever, like for single-celled organisms that are deciding, do I group together with other cells for safety and create a multicellular organism? Like that takes so long over so much time. But
that sapiens piece gives you a little bit of the magic left, a little bit of the magic again when you're in kind of a nihilistic space of like the idea that like you have that long of a history behind you. And you're just like this ancient story and you're in this chapter of this ancient story. Like that's where like, you know, religion has some magic in it and it's in its stories, but that story is pretty magical too.
Yeah, that you could cut open any living thing on the planet and you're going to see similarities between them because they all grew out of the same thing. And
I also like to think of stories like if I'm this chapter of this history of this kind of life form, right? Parents, all the way back to the beginning of whatever. You know, how am I going to write this chapter of this story? You know, that becomes really exciting instead of like nothing matters. You know, you're part of a long story. How do you want to end that story? How do you want to write that part of that chapter that you're in charge of?
Yeah. All right. I'm going to skip through some of these questions because there's a lot of them. And we're taking a long time on each one, which is awesome. I love it.
Yes, I am very verbose.
Oh, it's fantastic.
I never say one word when 10 will suffice.
Well, actually, I will go to the next question because this one could be interesting. Miracles happen on a daily basis.
Ooh, I'm going to say strongly disagree. You're going to bring out my strongly disagree on that one.
Okay. So tell me, why do you strongly disagree with that?
Yeah, I'm really resistant to that. Our brains are such pattern-seeking machines that I'm just really resistant to the idea that there are miracles because it's just too hard to prove and so easy to do because of how our brains see things. And so, you know, you take someone like Mother Teresa, and in order to have sainthood, you have to have 2 miracles, right? So the Catholic Church is looking through all of her history to find 2 miracles that can give her sainthood. And there's a woman who claims that she had a picture of Mother Teresa and she put it on her tumor and the tumor went away. And all of the doctors said, you know, this is the treatment that we did. This was the kind of tumor it was. This is how we treated it. This is how I got better. And we have like really clear science on how that tumor went away. But because she had the picture of Mother Teresa, she put it on the tumor, she swears that it went away. Because she said her name, the Catholic Church counts it as a miracle. It's one of the 2 miracles needed. Now she's a saint. And I'm just so over it. I'm just over it. It's just too easy to do. We just see patterns everywhere. And it's not just religious. I get into this with the New Age people too. So I have my beefs with the New Age spiritual people too, which is like you draw a card and it's a card of a phoenix, and you ask yourself, what in you has to die in order for something else to come to life? That is a brilliant question. That is a beautiful question to explore. There are many stories and archetypes and ways to go about that question. But then they make the move of like, oh, the universe really knew that I needed this question today because this thing is going on in my life. And it's like, well, you really primed your brain to think that because it's looking for a pattern. It's looking for meaning. It's going to create it wherever it sees it. When you give it an opportunity to put a pattern together, your brain will do it without kind of your knowledge of it. It's just what our brains do. And so I've spent enough time with people of faith and studying religions and studying these miracles that I'm just very, very skeptical of the miracle game at this point.
Okay. So how would you define miracle from the way that you're talking about
yes,
it here?
Suspending the laws of nature.
Okay. So you mentioned placebo earlier, and there's definitely times where people are miraculously, to use that word, quote unquote, healed in ways that Western medicine can't explain, doesn't understand. What's your explanation for those kinds of healings?
Yeah. So for example, like touching each other's bodies is really healing. Like we're deeply tribal people, and touching each other and having hope for each other, praying over each other, all these things, you can actually show, whether or not it's a placebo really depends on your belief, but you can show that people get better. And so what I want to do again with my approach with no nonsense spirituality is, okay, what is the tool? The tool is when you get your loved ones together and they touch your body and they say words of hope and they show you love and they show you that we're going to get through this. And they, again, like in whatever ritual it is where you're touching bodies in some way, because we're primates, essentially, it does quote unquote work. Now, does that mean I have to believe that your prayer is the real prayer to the right God? No. Does that mean I have to believe that energy, frequency, vibration from Mars and whatever? Do I have to go that route? No. Those are truth claims that are lying on top of the tool. And so again, my question is, how can we get the tool without getting into claims about ultimate reality that we don't know about?
Okay. So you're saying that the healing happens there because there's a real physiological healing that happens because we're social animals and touch can do that. But basically you're saying, and I'll ask you this, would you agree then that if there is a healing that takes place, it's for very like rational, natural causes, we just might not know what they are? Yeah. And so to take that mystery and then say, oh, it's because I pulled this card or because of belief in this God did it or whatever like that, that's missing the mark. That's more kind of childish. That's nonsense. Whereas
it's not necessarily childish. It's just kind of what's kind of covering the tool, right? The
reason I said childish is because you said a lot of times about like outgrowing, like outgrowing this belief. It's kind of like a childish belief. But you don't think that it's childish?
So, it depends. I think some are more childish than others, right? So there are some forms of prayer, for example, where it's just, you wish for something, and because you're the right kind of God and you say the right kind of words, then you get healed. But then if, there's some practices that I think are more easy to spot than others. Like that obviously seems kind of BS. But there's some that the tool is wrapped into the ritual. And so it's a little bit more hard to tease out what's really going on here. But I think when you do this enough times with enough rituals and practices and studying this across history, that as you begin to kind of tease these things apart, you can see, oh, it seems like when people are doing this, even though they have different stories about it, that people report feeling better. There's something here going on. Now, we may not know. I'm not so like scientifically knowledgeable or prideful that we know all of those things. There's tons that we're still learning about the body. I mean, even just how the body holds trauma, like this is all new science for us. But I do think that there always is an explanation, even if we don't know it, and that whatever story that we made that's wrapped up with the helpful tool does not mean that we have ultimate reality, right? Does not mean that your prayer to your God and you got better, therefore that God must be quote unquote true. I just don't like how that gets pulled into it.
Yeah. No, I'm with you on that. Okay, well, let's do one more and then we'll push
Okay.
pause for today. And you want to do this again another
Yeah,
time,
I'd love
Britt,
to.
and
This is
continue? That'd be
lovely.
awesome. I'd love
Usually
it.
I'm interviewing other people, so it's kind of nice to like, okay, here's what I
And-
think about this.
yeah, yeah, cool. All right. So the last one for today, and it's related to the last question about miracles. People who believe in miracles are setting themselves up for trouble.
Hmm. People who believe in miracles. Yeah, I'm gonna agree because the what I would put in the category of trouble there is that if you believe in miracles, there'll be a time in your life sometime when you're in need of a miracle and it's not going to happen. And that's going to be really painful. And you're not
Mm,
going to have the resources to deal with that. And you
mm,
see this all the time with religious people who fast and pray and we're doing all the right things and their child dies. And they have a deep crisis about that. Deep crisis about that. And there's a couple ways that that goes. That's either, well, God is so mysterious that God apparently wanted my child to die in this tragic, long, child cancer way, which is like, ooh, that feels kind of icky. And then, that, or there's like, I'm going to kind of deconstruct this because there's something I must not have been understanding here, or there's something about me that's broken and wrong. And all of that just sounds like really hard stuff that we can avoid by just not setting ourselves up for that. Because that's just a really shameful game to play when you ask for that miracle and it doesn't happen. And you're like, well, I guess I'm not worthy in some way. And
yeah.
that
Oh
really
my
sucks.
gosh.
And that really
Jeez.
sucks.
Yeah. My best friend growing up was in a wheelchair. I've done a couple episodes about him on Infants on Thrones, so some listeners might know who I'm talking about. But he was in a wheelchair growing up from an airplane accident when he was 5 years old, and he got a blessing from President Kimball because they were friends of the family, and told him that he would run and walk again with other children. He was 5 years old, and so he believed it. And every morning he'd wake up hoping that he could feel his legs again. He'd go to sleep every night praying, "Oh, is tomorrow the day?"
Mm.
And he kept feeling like when he would wake up and his legs weren't healed, what's wrong with me? Am I doing something wrong? Am I not worthy? And that like dogged him for his entire life. Anyways,
That breaks my heart. That
oh
just
yeah,
breaks my heart
oh
because
yeah,
eventually when you start believing in miracles, you'll start realizing why didn't God show up for me here?
mm,
And that is a hard pill to swallow and pain that I think, there's some pains in the human course of life that are unavoidable. You're going to get your heart broken. All kinds of things are going to happen. There's hard things that end up being good for you and your character, but I would put that whole thing into unnecessary pain. That's pain that he was already dealing with that with his legs. That was unnecessary pain on top of that could have been avoided. And I'm really all about like, how can we get rid of all of this unnecessary pain that's wrapped up in religion? It's just
yeah,
not, that's making life harder than it needs to be. And it's already hard.
yeah. I I I don't want to sound presumptuous, Britt, but I think I figured out a way to get rid of the pain without getting rid of the other stuff. But it's very personal to me. I don't know if it's
Mm.
something that's scalable to everyone, that will create systems and like new non-religious religions out of it or anything. Um, and I kind of lied a little bit. I am going to ask you one more question from this survey, but I
Okay.
want this to be the one that we
Lie,
like.
lie
Yeah,
aloud.
I'll lie. I'll lie a little bit, but I also kind of want this to be the first one that we pick up on next time, so that you've
Okay.
got some time to think about it. This is an intentionally vaguely worded question.
Okay.
Thoughts create reality.
Hmm. Okay. We'll riff on this next time. There's a lot of places that you and I could go
What
next time.
what's your initial thought on this before we wrap it
My
up?
initial thought is I tend to agree.
Mm,
I've done some training in thought work,
hmm
and thought work is the idea. in this space, it'd be more of a psychological tool where here's the scenario, here's the feeling, here's the thought, here's the result of what I do when I have this thought. And essentially going over to, this is the new thought, this is the thought that I want to think. And then it's going to take you somewhere else. And so, yeah, I think it's very clear that when we think that when we look out, we are just seeing things as they are. And the more we learn, we're realizing that our brains are creating the reality that we see in real time. So we really can't tell the difference. And so I'm very okay with the idea that we're not seeing ultimate reality, that we're creating, that we're seeing patterns, we're creating things, we're seeing things as our brain wants to see them. We hear things the way our brains want to hear them. Our thoughts direct us and really put a framework onto however we are interpreting reality. I'm okay with accepting all of that, and I'm okay with working through that. Some of those places can lead you into nihilistic places where you don't feel like you have free will. And I've worked with people in some of those places where you have to kind of make sense of that. But I'm okay. Just at first glance at that question, saying that I lean towards that. Yeah.
Well, I got to say, I kind of expected, because when I asked that question, and I worded it vaguely intentionally, because there'll be people that respond to it like, no, because I didn't think that mountain into existence. It's there. I didn't think that thing. Thoughts don't create reality. The world, like, thoughts don't create objective reality, something like that. And then they kind of argue from that while missing the part that you were talking about like how our experience of reality, the way we perceive reality, it's all filtered through our mind. And if you take a very general definition of what a thought is, as like the mechanical action of neurons firing, whatever this happening in our brain, everything we experience is that. Like, there is no reality, there's no experience of reality without those things, and they form such an important filter.
Yeah, I'll leave it at that. I'll leave with this thing. Maybe I shouldn't leave it here, but I want to say this.
Yeah.
Because we've just had such a deep discussion. The most scary thought that I had, like the deepest hole of nihilism that I've ever experienced, it was when, I had lost faith in God. I had kind of lost sense of free will and identity in there too. And I had this idea that if we were to do a thought experiment, I like to play in philosophy a little bit and do thought experiments. So if we were to do a thought experiment and we were to put you in a suit, a robot suit, and the robot's doing whatever it's doing, and you don't have any control over the robot, and the robot is actually quite violent. Like, in order for the robot to live, it has to kill conscious creatures in order to survive. And you're just going to watch it be violent. Would you consent to live inside that robot? And so most people will say no. But where I was in that kind of phase of nihilism was, I think that's what's going on here. Like, I think we are, like, the evolution and the lack of free will and there's no ultimate reality outside of the thoughts that I'm creating, and I can't see outside of that. It can get a little scary. But again, with all of these problems, no matter how big and scary that they are, you kind of grow to meet it. So I have to build a life that is meaningful enough to meet that scary dragon. I have to build a life that makes sense and is existentially good enough for me to exist in order to meet that level of kind of a nihilistic thought. And so I do think if you have people that can hold you in that space, or you have someone you can talk to in that space, that you can, I call them dragons because that's what Leo Tolstoy called them. He had the sense of nihilism gnawing at him. And for about 4 years, he wouldn't allow any ropes in his house for fear that he would commit suicide. These were really scary. But he eventually grew to, like, face them, grew to meet them, changed things in his life so that life was more worth living and that he could justify his existence more. So I do think that these monsters that our brains try to protect us from, are conquerable.
Yeah.
I do think it's hard, but I do think it's a really, really meaningful and beautiful and authentic path that, I've gone through, and now I enjoy helping other people go through. So that would be some of the work that I
love
do.
that. I love that analogy of the robot, like living inside of the robot that you can't really control. But I think what I heard you say at the end there was that we can actually learn how to control the robot. And it's kind of that process we talked about earlier about like observing your thoughts instead of just like doing whatever comes to you automatically.
It's gonna force you to a new level of freedom, and it's gonna force you to really get focused on what kind of life is worth living. And that's a painful process. You're gonna have to shed a lot of things. But if you can go through that process, there's a really beautiful kind of life on the other side that I try to at least give people hope for.
Right on. Well, thanks for doing this, Britt. We'll do this
so
again
lovely.
soon. Yeah, we'll have fun and enjoy it. And for any listeners who want to find you, where can they go to find you again?
Yeah, so my website is nononsensespirituality.com. You can sign up right there for coaching if you want to do some spiritual exploration with me. I also have a course on that website that I'm super proud of. It's called Spiritual Reconstruction. So if you feel like you have already done kind of the spiritual deconstruction, like that house has kind of come down for you, and you're in the space where you're like, okay, what's next? There's 10 kind of pieces that I do to kind of give you a map on, okay, let's rebuild together. So it would be rituals, death, morality and ethics, your sacred story, meaning and purpose, shadow and inner child work, awe and transcendence, community and inspiration, order and chaos. We touched on some of these things just because they're always on my mind anyway.
That sounds like an episode for each one of those things.
Oh, I could easily do one on each. But essentially I would break it down because of course not everybody has like, I don't know how many thousands of hours of podcasts and how many books you've read and all these things. I'm breaking it down into, okay, like rituals. You probably have boxes of rituals from your family and you're going to have, let's go through them together. What do you think about Christmas? How can you meet this holiday authentically? What rituals do you want to let go of? Which ones do you want to kind of tweak and make your own? Which ones do you still like? And so it's essentially going through each one and like a map and say, okay, what does this look like for you? There are 7 kinds of contemplation practices. Do any of these kind of strike you more than others? And so it's really just, instead of kind of blindly putting together your spiritual home piece by piece, which I feel like is what I did, it's more of a template. Like here's some options for a fireplace. Which one do you like? Okay, fireplace is done. And it will essentially kind of speed up that process of rebuilding your spiritual home. It's essentially what I would do in like a year with a client, kind of put together in one course that you can do on your own time and kind of journal through. It has workbooks and things like that. And I'm really proud of it. So if I'm speaking to you in any way and you feel like you're in that place, the what's next place after deconstruction, I'm really proud. It took me a year to put together, and I'm really proud of this course that I put together, and that's available on my website too. So thank you.
All right. Well, we'll schedule another time. We'll do this again soon.
Awesome. So good to talk, Glenn.
Thanks, Britt.
Yep. Bye.
Put down the weapons that you use against yourself. You don't need them anymore. Lay down the weapons that you use against the world. We don't need another war. Put down the weapons that you use against yourself.
Hi, this is Hillary.
Matthew, Ryan,
Carol,
Keith,
Ashley, and I like to play bingo online while listening to Infants on Thrones.
You can comment on this episode on the website, infantsonthrones.com.
And if you really like what you hear, give the Quorum a 5-star rating and write a short review on iTunes.
I did.
Anyone for the closing prayer?
My worst crime is an inside job. Dark thoughts taking over like an inside mob. I tune into the scene between the eyes and take a breath.
Thank you for listening to Infants on Thrones.
I sit still and watch the thoughts float past me. Never mind the future, never mind what the past be. I like to jump and let the universe catch me. 3-4, watch the beauty blow past me. I keep my pockets light, destination in sight. Keep my actions elevated to compassionate heights. I'm walking past the fight, laying down on Sunday night. Choosing love when I pick up this mic. So